my question, and it applies to all religions, not just Christianity, but we're going to focus on Christianity because that's what I grew up with. Does anyone really believe this shit? I mean, like, seriously, does anyone really believe this shit? I just don't see how anyone could. It's too ridiculous.
Alright, TJ, I'll bite. Does anyone really believe in God? The short answer, yes. We do believe there is a God.
Yeah, I'm going to disagree with TJ on this one, and it wouldn't be the first time. People believe in a variety of different things. I get that TJ is just poking fun at the ridiculousness of some Christian beliefs, but I think it would be dishonest to assume people don't have perceivably good reasons for believing in them. So I hope we are going to see some good reasoning from Inspiring Philosophy in defense of those beliefs. Hi, I'm R.
And I'm Jay.
And in this video, we're going to listen to Inspiring Philosophy tell us why he believes atheism is a delusion.
We believe in the evidence that theism is true, there is life after death, that Jesus was resurrected, and that the Bible was reliable. And we believe these things because the evidence supports it, not because we want to.
Well, that definitely remains to be seen, because there are plenty of people who will disagree with that sentiment, but I know you aren't trying to prove the existence of God in this video, so we can talk about your evidence another time. Let's hear about our delusional atheist beliefs.
And that is why we make our case through debating evidence and research. TJ, or the amazing atheist, is however not alone in this line of thinking. I've encountered many atheists who have asked me similar questions. Do you really believe there is a God, or do you just want there to be a God? Did you just invent a delusion to make yourself feel comfortable?
I can sympathize with you in this. Those kinds of questions are incredibly ignorant and demonstrate a distinct lack of empathy. I have heard these kinds of questions asked to theists and atheists alike. It is a difficult task to try and comprehend why another person can hold a belief which is vastly different from your own. But if we are ever going to achieve a greater understanding of our own beliefs, it's important to try and comprehend what can lead someone to hold the opposite belief. Suggesting they believe in something different simply because it would benefit them is both intellectually dishonest and lazy.
Well, I don't think it matters how many times we say it. I doubt that most atheists will take our word on it, that we really do believe there is a God, since many atheists already presuppose we have just invented delusions, instead of any of them actually listening to our arguments and reasons. They simply assume they just know better. So, I propose a point of agreement where atheists might listen, which is science. Why don't we see what science has to say about religious beliefs?
Now you're speaking my language. Let's hear what science has to say.
Has science studied religious beliefs, and does it indicate it is unnatural or a delusion? Well, yes, and in fact studies have indicated the opposite. And there are several we can look at. First, the work of two researchers looked at the chemistry of the brain during religious experience, and came to the conclusion mystical experience is biologically, observably, and scientifically real.
That's the best non-statement I've heard all day. Of course mystical experience is real. All experience is biologically, observably, and scientifically real. What is important is the stimulus which creates the experience. I hope there is some context for that statement, because without the context it is written in, it has no meaning.
In their book, Why God Won't Go Away, they explain that religious thought and experience is far from a delusion, and were not the result of emotional mistakes or simple wishful thinking, but were associated instead with a series of observable neurological events, which, while unusual, are not outside the range of normal brain function.
Oh good, there's context. And now I can say for sure that that statement doesn't mean what you think it means. It doesn't take much insight to see that the authors are stating that the observable neurological indicators of the so-called mystical experience fall within the parameters of normal brain function. What this means is that people who experience the mystical event really feel like they experienced it, because their brain reacted to the stimulus as though it was a real event. This, however, doesn't say anything about the reality of the stimulus which triggered the experience. A delusion is strongest when a person believes they experienced an event which is not supported by evidence. For instance, a visual illusion stimulated by a psychotropic drug will stimulate a perceivably real experience for someone, but the stimulus for that experience has no relation to the reality of what is experienced.
They report that their findings do not teach that one's sense of a spiritual reality is a delusion, but in fact quite the opposite. And just to be clear, let's point out that because religious experience happens in the brain, that doesn't mean it's a delusion.
Actually, if an experience occurs within the brain and is not supported by evidence or representative of reality, then it is exactly the definition of a delusion.
So their point can be seen in an analogy. Let's say you see a computer sitting in front of you right now. Now suppose there was a neuroscientist in the room with you that could specify your neurological pathways that are happening in your brain right now that create the belief that you see a computer sitting in front of you right now. Does that mean that the belief there's a computer in front of you is just created by your brain chemistry, and there's not really one outside of your brain that's sitting in front of you? Of course not.
Well, yes, actually. The belief that a computer is in front of me is manifested by my brain chemistry as a result of a visual and tactile stimulus. If that belief existed in the absence of the computer, then it is a delusion. The only way we are able to determine what is real and what is a delusion is by measuring consistency among observers. If 5 people are watching this video on a computer, and one of them says the computer is actually a dragon, but none of the other people in the room see a dragon, and there is no verifiable evidence of the dragon, who do you think is the delusional one? Because not both realities can be true. Using science, we can refine this consistency among observers to the most objective state. It's not simply enough to have a consensus among observers. Accuracy of the observations must be determined through verifiable methods.
And just because one may have a religious experience, that doesn't mean it is only created by the brain. Their research suggests it may in fact be generated by another reality.
New reality citation definitely needed. You referenced 3 papers there. 2 of them were discussing brain blood flow during massages and meditation. Not a single one even mentioned a different reality. You're referencing them here makes very little sense to me, as the reference doesn't seem to fit. Is this a mistake on your behalf? Admittedly, I couldn't get access to the 3rd study, though it is quite old, and from what I did read, there was no suggestion of alternate realities either. This is the kind of claim that really needs a direct quote, as well as multiple well-reasoned references.
Such a religious experience doesn't happen in the brain the same way delusions happen, and they are quite compatible with normal brain function, in a similar way that visual perceptions are.
Just because the experience follows normal brain function doesn't mean it is real. Delusions are simply beliefs that don't match reality. These can occur in perfectly normal brain functions. We've already covered this, and using visual perception as analogous to mystical experience, just because they both occur within normal brain function, is moronic. Visual perception is one of the easiest sensations to manipulate, and while it is a method by which we navigate reality, it is often found to be unreliable in many cases.
Plus, several other studies have shown theistic beliefs are quite natural. Jesse Bering, the former director of the Institute of Cognition and Culture, has published studies on the issue, and stated the research shows religion is natural in the sense of being motivated by core, evolved psychological intuitions.
I agree. Belief in religion is natural. That doesn't mean it isn't a delusion, however. I read those papers you referenced, and they outlined evolutionary reasons as to why humans may have developed a tendency to believe in religious claims. Not a single one of those studies argued that the beliefs weren't delusions. Humans are prone to false positives. That is one of the proposed mechanisms as to why humans believe in religion so easily. In other words, humans are prone to delusions. For example, deja vu occurs naturally in the brain, but it is a delusion that you have already done something when you haven't, due to cross-wiring in your neurology. It is a naturalistic fallacy to assert that because it occurs naturally, that you should give more credence to the idea.
It goes on later to say, belief is a cognitive default, and that all else being equal, in any given cultural context, religious beliefs are driven into expression by a universal, evolved core set of psychological intuitions present in all normal human brains.
This quote outlines exactly what we just mentioned. It is perfectly natural to default to a theistic position, but that doesn't mean it's a good position or an accurate one. The studies cited simply argue that human evolution and biology predispose us to false positives and assigning agency to naturally occurring phenomena. Simply put, many of the papers you reference say that we are biologically prone to delusion, and I agree with that. Incidentally, I was trying to find a good way to word this, and I found a good quote from one of the other detailed papers you referenced. It's titled, "Religion Bound to Believe." Religious concepts and activities hijack our cognitive resources, as do music, visual art, cuisine, politics, economic institutions, and fashion. This hijacking occurs simply because religion provides some form of what psychologists would call super stimuli, just as visual art is more symmetrical and its colors more saturated than what is generally found in nature. Religious agents are highly simplified versions of absent human agents, and religious rituals are highly stylized versions of precautionary procedures. Hijacking also occurs because religions facilitate the expression of certain behaviors. This is the case for commitment to a group, which is made all the more credible when it is phrased as the acceptance of bizarre or non-obvious beliefs." End quote. When you take an in-depth read into the references you have provided, the vast majority of them read like this: scientists trying to understand why we are so prone to these beliefs. It is nothing to do with religious beliefs not being delusions. If you are arguing that religious beliefs are natural, your references would make sense. But since you are arguing that religion is not a delusion and that atheism is, your references make no sense. Perhaps you were just under the impression that natural brain function can't result in delusions. I hope this isn't the case, or else the existence of deja vu or people believing in Scientology will really blow your mind. This seems to reek of either dishonesty or laziness to me, because not a single one of these articles you referenced supports your premise.
So religious beliefs are intuitive in all humans and completely natural to accept as true.
Yes, but that doesn't mean they aren't delusions. There is something I don't understand here. You are a Christian, and for your beliefs to be true, other people's religious beliefs have to be wrong. Wouldn't that mean that in your view, polytheists, for example, would also be delusional? But if we follow your premise that belief in theism is natural and hence not a delusion, then wouldn't that mean all of these differing exclusive belief systems also aren't delusions? Despite the fact, by very definition, every one of them besides yours has to be a delusion for yours to be right. Hinduism must be a delusion if Christianity is true. The obvious solution to this problem is to realize that delusion and natural aren't mutually exclusive.
And this is backed by a wealth of research. Banerjee and Bloom concluded our cognitive biases make us prone and receptive to religious ideas. Justin Barrett has published several studies on the behavior and beliefs of children and concludes theistic and religious beliefs are intuitive from a very early age, challenging the indoctrination hypothesis.
Again, this just reeks of dishonesty or laziness. Firstly, one of the reasons children accept theistic concepts so easily is due to their lack of experience and poor cognitive reasoning. I'm going to quote one of the papers you referenced called Anthropomorphisms and Preparedness, exploring children's God concepts by Justin Barrett and Rebecca Rickard. 3-year-olds assume beliefs and precepts are infallible. They assume greater access to background knowledge than humans actually have. They assume beings such as humans and gods have greater power to create than humans actually have. They at least fail to attribute mortality to intentional beings such as people and God. These default assumptions or biases lead young children to reason quite poorly about other people, but much less poorly and indeed quite accurately, according to some theologies, on some dimensions about God. Now, this quote might seem a bit messy, but it outlines how children inaccurately perceive reality and then succeed in accepting a God. Now, if you come into this already believing that a God exists, the confirmation bias makes this seem like it supports a belief in a God, but when a person who doesn't already accept the existence of God reads it, the sentence just says children suck at accurately perceiving reality, and not understanding reality means they accept a God easily. This next quote clarifies the author's meaning when it comes to children accepting a religion. What we are suggesting is certain conceptual biases that make acquiring God concepts particularly natural but not necessarily inevitable. Much as someone can possess tremendous natural ability in music, without proper exposure to music, these abilities might never be actualized. Likewise, relevant cultural inputs are undoubtedly necessary to acquire any particular God concept. Children will still need to be exposed to ideas about God or divine beings of any particular tradition, their attribute, their personalities, their domains of concern, and so forth. The claim here is that children may require very little direct training or tuition to acquire fairly rich theological concepts. This clearly shows that the author is suggesting a natural bias towards theistic concepts, especially among children who lack the ability to accurately predict the reality around them. Furthermore, the children must be exposed to these concepts for the beliefs to develop, or as some would call it, indoctrination.
In a few studies he cites, Dr. Barrett demonstrates that young children naturally believe things were created as they are, and exist with purpose, instead of existing for no reason and lacking design. In his book he says, children are prone to believe in supernatural beings, such as spirits, ghosts, angels, devils, and gods, during the first 4 years of life, due to ordinary cognitive development in ordinary human environments.
Yes, children are prone to many unsubstantiated beliefs. Have you ever talked to a child? I don't desire to emulate their levels of critical thinking. Wouldn't believing in Santa or ghosts be a delusion? The problem here is you are quoting research that says tendency towards religion is natural, to try and make the argument that it isn't a delusion. Again, delusion and natural aren't mutually exclusive. If any of the papers you quote support your statement that natural beliefs by definition aren't delusions, then show us those quotes.
His research even included children who were raised in atheistic households, who were exposed to very little religion, and yet he still found the same results. But are not children just making up imaginary friends, which is all theism is? According to his research, no. In fact, despite the cultural myth, evidence suggests children can distinguish imagination from reality and understand that there is an ontological difference between an imaginary friend and a real person, with only a little bit of temptation to think the imaginary friend is actually real. Yet children seem to include the existence of God in the realm of real. The existence of God is far more than just a delusion and a game of pretend, and is quite natural in our cognitive development.
See, that bit that was in the brackets is kind of important. Let me quote one of the concluding sentences from the paper you referenced. The experiments suggest that children systematically distinguish fantasy from reality, but are tempted to believe in the existence of what they have merely imagined. End quote. And you know what would be a good way to indulge that temptation? For it to be something that the adults in their lives believe in too. You realize the vast majority of children don't understand that Santa isn't real until their parents or someone else tells them. With things like imaginary friends, not everyone in their social structure accepts it too. Religion is vastly different in this case. The majority of adults don't believe in monsters under the bed, but they do believe in some kind of God, hence influencing their children and the children around them. But again, all of your evidence and quotes is arguing that religion is natural, not that it isn't a delusion.
So since the evidence leads us to accepting theistic beliefs are natural and intuitive, the flip side of the coin would say the opposite about atheism. To the ironic surprise of many atheists, who claim religion is an unnatural delusion that must be eradicated.
Strawman! Strawman, is that you? Look, I don't think most atheists, definitely not us at least, would argue that religion is unnatural, but we would argue that it is a delusion. Let's say I state that religion is a natural delusion that needs to be eradicated. Your whole video falls apart because all you've done so far is argue that it is natural. Being natural does not mean it isn't a delusion. You still need to demonstrate why natural thought processes can't create delusions.
Research actually shows it is atheism that is unnatural and almost impossible for the human mind to believe.
I've noticed that sometimes you pull out very specific quotes, but then you make a statement like that with no specific reference. Curious that. Very curious.
This means the research would suggest that most atheists actually believe there is purpose and meaning in their life, and believe in a higher being even if they don't realize it or admit it.
The problem here is you either aren't reading these papers or now you don't understand what atheism is. Atheism means someone doesn't believe in a god or gods. It doesn't mean they don't believe in something such as fate. You can be an atheist and believe in reincarnation, astrology, or chakras. You would be a shit skeptic, but still an atheist. The paper doesn't state that they believe God is responsible for it. It states that people, including atheists, are likely to believe in some overall purpose. See this quote. Our findings suggest that etiological reasoning about life events is not solely the product of cultural learning, although it may be moderated to some extent by certain cultural religious beliefs. Rather, adages such as "it was meant to be" and "everything happens for a reason" are expressions of the way people naturally view the world as imbued with agency, intention, and meaning. End quote. That doesn't mean God is responsible for that meaning. For example, I believe there is meaning in my life. I just find it in other places outside of magic. I see value in love and sharing experiences with friends and family. And with that everything happens for a reason, humans have optimism bias. That makes us inclined to see positivity and meaning where there may not be any. That doesn't mean they secretly believe in God.
Baring says, in a more recent study, self-described British and American atheists were asked a series of quasi-structured interview questions about their own major life events as part of an alleged study on autobiographical memory. Many of these individuals' answers revealed an implicit attribution of teleofunctional fatalistic purpose to these turning points in their lives. A typical example of an atheist reasoning in this manner is shown in a response given by a British undergraduate student who considered herself to be an unflinching non-believer. One of the most significant events in her life, she said, was failing an important university course and losing her prestigious scholarship. It changed everything. But when she was asked why it happened to her, an ambiguous question that appealed to her poor study habits, challenges at home, or ineptitude as much as anything else, she answered, "So that I could see that even if I failed a course, my life wouldn't actually end." This woman is indeed an atheist, in terms of how she identifies herself. And yet, like many religious believers, she sees some intrinsic meaning in her personal life events.
Yes, but notice she never said anything about a god. You just assume all meaning comes from God. The quote from the unpublished study that was referenced wasn't a theistic statement. You know what it does show? People are naturally inclined to assign agency and purpose where there is none. Whilst perfectly natural, it is still a delusion. You still need to clarify this relationship between natural and a delusion.
A recent study found that atheists become emotionally aroused when asked to dare God or strike them down, suggesting that subconsciously they do believe in a higher power, even if they consciously do not admit it. In the first study, reading the provocations addressed to God increased atheists' emotional arousal more than reading neutral statements about such things as sleep and weather. Second, God's statements resulted in equal tension among atheists as reading the offensive statements. For example, it's okay to kick a puppy in the face. Third, the same pattern of results was obtained for religious individuals. The results indicate that compared to their conviction and responses on the self-report measures, atheists' implicit reactions to the God statements were more similar to the reactions of religious individuals. When reading the God statements in Study 2, atheists experienced greater emotional arousal than when reading the offensive statements. Moreover, when reading the God statements, atheists' emotional arousal increased as much as did religious individuals' arousal. Atheists also refused to say aloud the God statements, and they felt the need to undo the statements equally often as religious individuals did, although neither group refused to say the statements very often or retracted statements very often. In other words, one may think that they don't believe in a God, but that doesn't necessarily connect to a true repressed belief they have, or that belief may be present in their mind even if they're consciously not aware of it.
Okay, so you definitely didn't read that paper, or stopped reading once you had gotten what you wanted. So let's listen to how they conclude their paper. Quote time. There are at least 4 potential explanations for these findings. Because emotion and cognition strongly interact and jointly contribute to behavior, the first possibility is the most provocative. In line with Bering's argument, atheism may lack cognitive depth, in that atheists' explicit beliefs may differ from the implicit reactions that exist outside of conscious awareness. However, atheists may have found using the word God stressful because others, possibly their friends and family, do take God seriously and believe in his ability to affect the world. Third, although the participants did not rate the idea of God as the reason for the unpleasantness of the statements, appealing to God may nevertheless have been absurd or aversive to atheists, leading to a dissonance-related effect. Fourth, it is possible that although atheists did not currently believe in God, they may have been influenced by their previous beliefs. Hunsberger and Altmaier surveyed American atheists and found that 71 to 76% of them had once believed in God. On the basis of the present data, it is not possible to determine which explanation is more satisfactory. End quote. This mistake on your behalf can't be due to laziness, as you clearly spent a fair whack of effort going over the paper to quote all of those things, so it just leaves dishonesty or some severe confirmation bias for you to ignore the actual findings of the authors and just to pervert their results to fit with your narrative.
In a similar study, Pascal Boyer equally states that disbelief is generally the result of deliberate, effortful work against our natural cognitive dispositions, hardly the easiest ideology to propagate. Norenzayan and Gervais recently said that disbelief requires some hard cognitive work to reject or override the intuitions that nourish religious beliefs.
Yes, because when it's natural to believe in false positives, it's pretty hard to try and approach the world skeptically. That is why we have the scientific method, as it tries to remove human bias as much as possible. It is difficult and takes effort to try and combat human bias. The path of least resistance isn't necessarily the best approach. Again, you need to outline the relationship between natural and delusions.
Another study from 2011 shows atheists exhibit anger towards God, which is strange because you can't really be angry at things you don't think exist. I may not like the character of Zeus or Allah, but that doesn't mean I hate them. Yet studies show atheists are mad at God. But why? Perhaps their disbelief is not really disbelief, but a rejection and hatred towards someone they know exists. And disbelief is just a mental way of dealing with their anger.
Okay, so again, I wasted a good portion of time reading another load of your references trying to understand where you are pulling these ideas from, and the paper you were referencing didn't state that atheists secretly believe in a god. Enjoy another quote outlining your subpar research skills. This is directly from the paper you are referencing. These findings suggest that researchers and clinicians might miss important information if they restrict their work on anger towards God to religious affiliates and professed believers. Not only may some atheists and agnostics have anger towards God as part of their religious/spiritual history, but some may still have anger focused on the images of a hypothetical God. End quote. See? Nothing about secret belief. Turns out some atheists get pissed off at the concept of a god. Big surprise there. There is a common thread here, and it seems to be you misrepresenting these papers. It's annoying because I have to spend large periods of time reading them just to refute a claim you make so quickly. I have a feeling this is why your videos have had success. Most people don't bother to fact check the dozens of papers you will reference. Well, my time is worthless because I'm an atheist, so you have met your match.
Again, there is so much research on this, it would be impossible to cover it all without making a video that's over an hour long.
Praise be Allah for that, because I really don't have the time to keep reading these papers to find out how badly you are representing them.
But the data shows religious people really do believe God exists, and their belief is completely normal with cognitive brain development, not a delusion or a mental trick.
See, you have referenced papers that say belief in theism is natural because of human cognitive biases. Not a single one of those papers says that it is or isn't a delusion. They aren't concerned with the topic of delusion. You seem to be conflating the terms natural and delusional. Just because something is natural doesn't mean it isn't a delusion. Oh, sweet Joseph Smith, how hard is this to understand?
It is in fact atheists whose beliefs are unnatural, and the data leads to a strong possibility their beliefs are actually the ones that are delusions.
Why? You literally haven't made a case for delusions on either side here, and this video is almost over. How did you come to the conclusion that natural thought processes can't lead to a delusion? You have made the claim that theism is natural, but there are multiple variants of theism, and lots of them claim to be exclusively true, so the others must be a delusion. If it is natural to hold these beliefs, then at least some of these natural beliefs must be delusions. Both Hinduism and Christianity can't be right at the same time.
So in return to the atheist who asked, do we really believe in our religion? Yes, and we have the science to back it.
I think that you really do believe in God. I don't, however, believe that science supports the existence of a God. The conclusions you are drawing from these papers are in direct contradiction to the author's conclusions, and hence I cringe to think about what you would perceive as evidence for God's existence.
In fact, it appears atheism is the unnatural belief that people have to force themselves to accept. Perhaps atheists have invented their beliefs to delude themselves into thinking there is no higher power to tell them how to live. Perhaps it makes them feel comfortable to think they don't have to worry about being judged later on for their actions, and they can do whatever they please now.
By that logic, I could just say I can commit as many crimes as I want as long as I don't believe in the police. If I know they exist, I can't just choose not to believe in them. That's a contradiction. Even if I could somehow do that, me not believing in them won't stop them from arresting me, and any sane person can reason that. Furthermore, you criticize TJ for saying you just want to believe in God because it makes you feel good, then you do the exact same thing, just inverted. Double standards, bro.
Whatever the reason, the irony cannot be passed up. We are told religion is a delusion created by wish fulfillment, and peer-reviewed studies suggest it is the other way around.
None of the ones you referenced suggested that. Literally, not a single one of them did.
So atheists, why are you believing a delusion? And do you really believe this odd fairy tale you've told yourselves?
You know, fairy tales typically involve stories and books.
Oh, sick burn.
Now to wrap up, I want to be clear, I'm not saying this demonstrates logically that God exists.
No, you were just saying that because we are biologically predisposed to believe in a God, it can't be a delusion, without actually doing anything to prove that natural beliefs can't be delusions. It was a terribly weak argument.
I have plenty of direct arguments for that. But this research is what we would expect if theism were true, meaning that atheism is a delusion, and we all have this natural sense that God does exist, given to us by our Creator.
Wait. You need to wait. What? I genuinely don't know what to say here. The fact that people are prone to theistic beliefs doesn't mean the theistic beliefs are true. That is a naturalistic fallacy. Please stop.
This also shows something very interesting. See, for years I've been debating with atheists about the overwhelming evidence for God's existence. And a lot of times the atheists will just give up and say, well, it's not enough to convince them. Well, due to the studies I cited in this video, I find that hard to believe. Because according to the data, it is very natural and easy for people to accept the existence of God. And it takes hard cognitive work to believe atheism is true. So when we present the evidence that God exists, it shouldn't be too difficult for anyone to accept.
Yeah, if you disregard critical thinking, which comes naturally to humans, you have to work hard to apply critical thinking throughout your whole life. Perhaps atheists give up because you present subpar evidence and won't budge when they poke holes in it. Look, I haven't watched all of your videos, and I will put some time aside to, but for you to say people don't accept your evidence because they already know God exists and are just choosing not to accept it, it just reeks of ignorance.
Unless they have an underlying emotional desire to reject God, perhaps due to anger or the desire to be their own God, whatever it may be.
How can I be my own God? I'm not magic. Something to bear in mind is that dogmatic beliefs are usually associated with assigning dishonesty and bad intentions to your opponent without good reasons to assert them. Now, I don't think you have bad intentions. I think you genuinely believe these things but are mistaken. And given how poorly you read scientific papers, I'm not really surprised that you are mistaken. The fact that you can just assert that atheists willingly delude themselves just shows me how dogmatic you are when it comes to this topic. You're no better than what you accused TJ of being at the start of this video. You even made the exact same argument he did.
But the point remains. There is no good reason to reject the existence of God, especially when we have a mountain of evidence and data to support our arguments. According to the research, it requires some hard cognitive work to deny the existence of God, and there is plenty of evidence out there to support his existence anyway. So in the end, the data only leads me to wonder, who are atheists really trying to fool? Us or themselves?
Given how poorly you have interpreted the studies you quoted in this video, I am very skeptical that you have correctly interpreted the rest of the data you purport to have regarding God's existence. But that really is a discussion for another video. What's important is that literally every paper you referenced was either misrepresented by you or argued in the complete opposite direction to your conclusion. Yes, the science says theistic belief is natural, but in no way does that relate to the reality of that belief. Yes, it takes effort and critical thinking to reject the natural tendency of theism, but that doesn't make atheism any less credible. This is just a simple naturalistic fallacy, and easily refuted when someone asks you the question of why you don't believe in Odin, Buddha, or Vishnu, despite other people believing in them just as naturally as you believe in Yahweh. So which one is the delusion? And with that, I think we're done here. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for weekly videos, like this video, and share it around to help us raise the bar of public discourse.